Hi everyone, I'm John Friedberg and welcome to Under the Gun. I have a very special show today. Let me first say real quick though that my production crew is currently in Europe following the World Series of Poker Europe. Awesome event going on over there. But because they're gone, I had to do a little bit of filming before they left, which means I'm not going to be able to film any real-time updates on my Under the Gun challenge or any Am I an Idiot segment. So this week's episode is just going to be a special interview with a gentleman that I have become friends with and has become quite the Twitter celebrity in the poker world. He tweets under the name @GamingCouncil, and his name is Stuart Hoegner, and the man is extremely informed and up to date on all of the legal issues in poker. So I'm going to talk to Stu primarily about HR 2267, which, as all of you probably know, is the bill that will hopefully legalize online poker here in the U.S. So with that said, let me have Stu on the show and hear what he has to say. Mr. Stuart Hoegner, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks very much for having me, John.
You have become sort of a poker Twitter celebrity in the last few months, and you and I have been talking about coming onto the show for a long time. So I'm pretty excited to finally have you here.
I'm very excited to be here. I would disclaim the moniker celebrity, but I'm really happy to be here. I'm sorry we missed each other during the WSOP.
No problem. So I have a few questions to ask you. Mostly for anyone that follows you on Twitter, you give all sorts of information on the legal aspects of poker, whether it's, company X getting licensed in France to, progress on legalization of online poker in the US. How do you get all of your information?
Through my work, a number of sources really. Through my work in the gaming sector, through trolling through the internet, through Pacer, the court document service here in the States, through looking at other court documents, and frankly, Twitter's a great resource for me as well. People like you, other people that I follow on the medium, give me a lot of great information, and there's a lot of retweets that come out of my account. Really,
okay. So before I get too in depth into some of these questions, why don't you tell me and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in gaming law?
I started my career as a tax attorney, and was practicing in tax full time for a number of years, and then went in house to essentially leverage my tax background and experience for a publicly traded gaming company. Went in there when they ended up going private in 2006. I made the move and set up my own practice in gaming, and still practice about 20% of the time in tax, but the rest of the time is all around different gaming issues. So. And
so you represent at least one of the major gaming sites, as well as other companies as well?
I represent a couple of the major poker sites, and do some work in international penny auctions, some skill-based gaming, some land-based tournament gaming, that kind of thing. Some banking work.
Okay, great. So probably the biggest topic in poker law, or regulation, whatever you call it, as far as in the United States, is HR 2267, which basically, and I'll let you I'll let you explain it, but basically has to do with officially regulating the online poker sites to conduct business here in the U.S.
Yep.
Tell us exactly what HR 2267 is.
Probably don't have time to talk about exactly what it is in all its detail, but you have it exactly right, John.
Okay.
It's a measure that was introduced in 2009 by Representative Frank of Massachusetts, who's also chair of the Financial Services Committee in the House, and it is a measure that seeks to regulate internet gaming in the United States by creating the Internet Gambling Licensing Program under the auspices of the Secretary of the Treasury. And the Secretary then has enforcement mandates and jurisdiction to regulate that program and to license people to be operators. And the Act goes on to prohibit people from accepting U.S. bets or wagers when they are not licensed under those auspices. The bill has been, as you know, reported favorably out of the committee, out of the Financial Services Committee, and with amendments, that certain amendments were passed. So where we are now is it's been passed out of committee. It has to still go through and pass the full House, has to pass the full Senate. Any differences between the House and Senate version need to be reconciled, reaffirmed by those bodies, and then it goes to the president for signature if in fact we get that far. Forgetting about a veto by the president. So
now, what is the time frame? That's maybe a tough question to answer, but what exactly is the time frame for going through the House and then the Senate and then ultimately reaching the president?
Things can happen quickly, as UIGEA taught us in October of '06. But you're right to indicate that. It's a tight timeline. There are limited days left in the current congressional session, both before the midterm elections, as well as after that in the lame duck session of Congress. So it's not to say that it can't be done, but it's a tall order to get it done. Precisely because history's taught us that things can happen quickly, it's probably a good idea still to pay attention to this bill and to follow it. It's still an interesting measure.
Now, what exactly does regulation mean beyond allowing or not allowing sites to operate in the U.S. if they're licensed? In other words, does regulation mean that there will be some sort of audit committee overseeing the the poker software to make sure that the shuffler is truly random,
right?
To tax certain payouts.
So I think regulation, if you look at the Frank bill, regulation is going to be, by the terms of the bill and its amendments, quite robust. There are provisions in there for hiring of suitably experienced enforcement agents, and the bill specifically provides that the United States Secretary of the Treasury is authorized to use, I can't remember the exact wording, but it's any measures, any provisions according to law, basically all of the tools that all the legal tools at the disposal of the United States government. So that could be a pretty broad class of instruments that could be used. I don't think anyone should doubt that there's going to be things like tax disclosure involved. In fact, the legislation specifically sets out that licensees need to provide for mechanisms for paying taxes both of the licensee and of the players, as well as developing things like underage and at-risk gambling programs, that kind of thing. So I think regulation, under at least as far as the terms of the Act are concerned, will be quite robust.
Okay. Now, let's say that that the bill is passed and everything goes into full effect. We now have fully, unquestionably legalized online poker in the U.S. Mm-hmm. How will the landscape change from where it is today?
I think the changes could be, I think some changes could be gradual and some changes could be quite immediate. I think that what you'll see very immediately is a lot of U.S. land-based operators who are very quickly then gearing up to provide an online offering.
Like Harrah's, Google, Facebook, for example?
Harrah's is a great example, actually. Harrah's Interactive is betting on U.S. regulation and is already gearing up to get in on this action when and if things are legalized in the United States. Google's another interesting choice or interesting example. Google is a site that might very well be interested in getting in on the action. Facebook is already permitting or facilitating online gaming, not for money, but they're already facilitating online gaming on Facebook. So clearly, this is an area that's of interest, not just to land-based operators, but to people that are in social media, to search engines, that kind of thing.
Okay. Now, what about, I've read something on Twitter, maybe some sort of rumors floating around that, in fact, it might have been one of your tweets that I read that had something to do with if 2267 gets passed and online poker does become legal in the U.S., that sites that have been currently conducting business here, i.e. PokerStars, Full Tilt, possibly UB, would not be permitted to continue conducting business here. Is that true?
I think the short answer to the question is no one knows. Under the terms of 2267, Congress seems to have taken, and its amendments as well, Congress seems to have taken certain steps to foreclose operators that are currently operating internationally from entering the U.S. market, from being licensed, even from people acquiring assets or equipment of those operators and then leveraging them and using them in the United States. The question is, the bigger question is that going to be the final text of the bill? Is that going to be changed at all? Is 2267 going to pass? No one really knows. I think that international operators, I sense that they do have some connections in political Washington, and I think the question that legislators might usefully ask is, are the people who are fundamentally their constituents here in the United States, the land-based operators, are they going to be interested in making deals with people that have been developing brands over the past 15 years that are currently operating in the United States, that are international operators? And if the answer to that is yes, then that might condition how they approach the question and whether or not they're going to permit something like that. What I have said on Twitter, and I've said a couple of instances, is that no one should doubt Congress's ability and resolve to draft how they want to draft and exclude whom they want to exclude. I'm just not sure they're necessarily going to exclude certain people going forward.
Okay. Now, let's say that things don't go so well and the regulation is shot down. HR 2267 gets, denied, or whatever the official legal terminology is. I'm not sure.
It doesn't pass.
Okay. What happens? What happens then? Will poker continue as it is today?
I think that question feeds into what I see are some of the trends emerging in poker. Some of them contradict each other, but we're seeing consolidation in the industry. We're seeing, for example, the party gaming merger with bwin that was announced this past summer. We're seeing moves towards normalizing and legitimizing the sector. That's ongoing in the United States at the federal level and the state level. I mean, we've got the McDermott bill in Congress, we've got the Frank bill. That's just the federal. Number of states are considering this. In Canada, where I'm from, we've got Ontario that's looking into getting into online gaming in the next couple of years. So there are moves in significant sectors in Europe, here in North America, to normalize gaming, and I think those trends will continue. And I think those trends also feed into an earlier question about Facebook and new actors getting into the game. So I think those trends will continue whether HR 2267 passes or not. It seems to me, but certainly HR 2267 would accelerate a couple of them, I think.
Okay, so let's say that HR 2267 does get passed,
okay,
and now I think the online site operators have to establish their presence here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean every country that these companies are licensed to do business in, they have to have a presence in, or is that just specific to the U.S.?
No, that's not specific to the U.S. That's a good question. There are a number of licensing regimes in France. There are a number of licensing regimes worldwide on the interactive gaming side. That require local presence or some kind of nexus to the country, and they vary. Sometimes they require local corporations, sometimes they just require some other kind of equipment nexus, or an address and some kind of procedure for paying taxes. So it can vary, but that's not unique to the United States, or that's not unique to HR 2267.
Okay, and one other rumor that's flying around, or I should say topic that people are discussing a lot. I don't know if you know much about this, but I'm curious to hear your opinion. If HR 2267 gets passed, will that do anything for the poker endorsement world? For players like myself and others,
sure.
Will new companies be looking to, grab up a bunch of players to represent them from a marketing standpoint?
I think we might see a shift from. It's really going to depend. There are a couple of aspects to that. So we might see a shift from people that are going to be licensed in the United States to people that, from people that are not going to be licensed in the States to people that are. But there's a whole there's a whole world out there outside of the United States as well. So I think you might continue to see, in a sense, maybe some fragmentation on the pro side, and you could see people that are recruited to be particular pros for particular markets where those operators see a need or a benefit. So there might be, I suspect that there are going to be lots of great opportunities for a number of people, and I would think that pros would be among that group.
Okay. Another question that I get, and I get quite a few emails from people asking me if online poker is legal right now in the U.S. What would your answer be to somebody saying, I want to create an account on UB, but I don't know if it's legal to do?
I think the question with respect to players is fairly straightforward with a couple of wrinkles in the United States. So there's no federal law in the U.S. that makes it illegal to play online poker. There is at least one state, Washington, that does make it, I shouldn't speak about what class of felony it is because I don't recall, but it does make it a state crime to play online poker. I'm not sure that there have been any prosecutions in Washington, but that law is on the books. But there's no federal law prohibiting it. And far and away most of the states don't prohibit it.
Okay. And my last question. Based on your expertise, and you certainly seem like quite the expert here, what percentage would you say, what odds would you give HR 2267 of passing?
Wow.
Or can you not answer that because of conflict?
Well, no, it certainly wouldn't be a conflict. I'm just worried about being proved wrong in 6 months. So I would, look, my sense at this point is that there is a less than 10% chance that it would go through. But
really? Even after such a high response to the initial hearing on it?
Look, I mean, there are a limited number of days left in the congressional session. It's a tall order. It certainly could be passed, but it's a long road to hoe. I would say that there's still a distinct chance though, because again, things can happen quickly. And look at 2006. In September 2006, very few people thought the UIGEA was going to pass. So I want to be very circumspect about that. That said, it's a big deal. I think there are a number of potential deficiencies and problems that people have with the current legislation. So I'd be kind of surprised if it passed in its current form, but anything's possible.
Are we on a deadline where if it doesn't hit the deadline, then the whole bill goes to crap and someone has to start another one later?
I think the deadline is the end of the session, which is between the midterm elections and the final day of the session this year, which I believe is December 31st.
And then if we miss the deadline
if
without
it misses
progress?
that, my understanding is if it doesn't make it by then we don't start over, but that bill dies and we have to start, in a sense, from scratch next year. But bear in mind that we have a hearing sort of history. There's been a lot of talk and debate about this. So all of that work, all of that effort isn't in vain. Yes, we'll have to start with a new bill that will have to be introduced, but there's a lot of legwork that's been done. And people are more and more comfortable with this. And feeding back to that trend about normalization and legitimizing an industry, I think we're further down that path my sense is in the United States than we were even a couple of years ago. So that means something.
Awesome. Well, hopefully everything will work out. And Stu, thank you so much for coming on the show.
John, thanks very much for having me.
It's been great to have you here.
Appreciate it.
And again, I really enjoy following Stu on Twitter under the name Gaming Council. And of course, I myself am at John Friedberg. So thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you next week right here on Under the Gun.